What's up? My name's Glueboy, welcome back to the channel, and this is one I've been putting off for a while. Full disclosure, I'm not a fan of these guys, and so I've been putting it off just a little bit. Today we're talking about the Tau Empire. Now, I'm gonna preface this right here. I'm not a fan of the Tau. However, this is not gonna be a video me shitting all over their lore and all their stuff. That's not what this is, because that's not cool, in my opinion. But it's also not cool to sit here and talk about all the things the Tau have and kind of lie that I like all of it. It's nothing super on their lore and stuff, it's not been treated the best, but also, it's just not my vibe. I don't like Gundam, I don't like mecha stuff. There's a few exceptions like I mentioned last week, but not my vibe. I'm too into the Imperial Gothic themes or chaos being chaos. Like, that's my shtick. It's just, we don't vibe. Though I do actually have a lot of exposure to the Tau because I have a good friend of mine and a roommate who loves the Tau. And he's been personally pushing me to make this video. Though, this is also that same friend who owns a Tau Manta, so take his request with a grain of salt. I feel like he has a horse in this race. But anyways, the Tau. So the Tau are actually a really recent addition to Warhammer, at least in the general lore, as they only really popped up as the Tau that we know and some love in the 41st millennium. Because Tau, originally when they were first discovered, was in the good old days of the Age of Apostasy, M35. Back in the good old days where Goj Van Dyer was being a tyrannical piece of shit and a little creepy to his Sisters of Battle. At that time, there was the Tau in their very primitive state, essentially like the Stone Age. And the Imperium was just gonna like, oh, here's a bunch of non-developed like Xenos race, let's just kill them all and take their planet, easy money. And they were gonna go do that, but a giant warp storm took over the planet and basically made it so warp travel onto the planet was impossible. So they just dipped. And then Goj Van Dyer got, killed. So it kind of like threw a little hamper in the works of somebody reporting that, hey, we found a planet full of blue kind of fish people, maybe we should go deal with it. And so it was lost to ages. Until eventually, 6,000 years later, they popped right back up and were really fucking developed. Now, that I feel like should be put in perspective. The Tau got to the point of the Stone Age to like ion weapons, giant mech suits, ridiculous level tech in 6,000 years. To put in perspective, human beings, Homo sapiens, have been on Earth for 300,000 years, give or take a few thousand years. And as well, humans have only had like an organized society for about 10,000 years. So that's a leap. And that's 10,000 years up to current modern tech. We're not piloting Gundams and blasting ion beams into somebody. Like, that's not what we're doing. We have smartphones and regular guns. And so obviously this whole rapid development caused some questions and put them on an immediate threat list for the Imperium. But what actually happened? How did they get to that point? Well, it's an interesting little story. So the Tau back then were divided into a set of tribes based on where they actually went and settled. The air tribes were the ones who went up to the mountains, and this is a delightful image, grew skin flaps that let them rise and flow on thermal currents in the air. Or there was the ones who settled in the plains who became really good hunters and were actually pretty good warriors. Or the ones that settled near the rivers and like in some canyons that got really good at metalworking and agriculture. But eventually, they started bickering with each other. Tribal differences caused a lot of warring things to happen, and resources started getting a little scarce for what they were technologically able to get, so they started killing each other. And honestly, the escalation of this military conflict between all the different Tau got to a pretty extreme extent. In fact, it was looking like they would just wipe themselves out and save the Imperium the whole trouble. And eventually, during a massive siege to what would later be known as the Fire and the Earth Caste, the Ethereals came up in the middle of a giant siege that lasted like a real long ass time. The Ethereals walked up out of nowhere and just started being like, hey guys, we should stop fighting. For the greater good, we should band together and help. And the Fire Caste was like, damn, you make a good ass point. Yeah. And then they walked into the gates and talked to the Earth Caste, and they were also like, yeah, you're making some good points, greater good and all. And within a pretty short amount of time, the Ethereals convinced all the Tau to band together under their banner of the greater good, which is the guiding philosophy of the Tau. Everything is very communal, and you're building to a common goal. The greater good is very loosely defined, if I'm going to be completely honest, as like if you read any books with Tau characters, they kind of just throw out greater good, greater good. We're talking about the greater good today. Like, that's pretty common. A lot of it is just like working together and camaraderie rather than killing each other violently, which every other faction of 40k really hates. They disagree with it vehemently. So then that leads us to like the million-dollar question. Who are the Ethereals? Where do they come from? Because we don't actually really know. The Ethereals to the Tau appeared. There were some bright lights and then they kind of came out walking. Now the Ethereals are genetically the same as a normal Tau. However, they have a special little organ right here, a diamond on their forehead. Now, this is interesting because there's another Xenos race on the other side of the galaxy known as the Coral. These big spider things that have a very, very similar, if not exactly the same organ that allows them to communicate and kind of like interact with each other based on pheromones. So, it's heavily implied that the Ethereals are working under some sort of pheromone-based mind control on the Tau, which a lot of you might not already know this. This part was added later because there were a lot of complaints when the Tau first dropped in that they were too much of the good guys. So now they kind of reeled it back and had some grimdarkifying to their faction, which is kind of still a bit of a misconception. Even though they're big on like working together and the greater good, if you put the Tau in any other science fiction universe, they would be the bad guys. They're good for 40k standards. When you're, the things to compare you to are genetic superhumans who view all mortal life under them as like lower. You have BDSM pirates, bugs that want to eat everything. A lot of genuinely horrible stuff. So like, when there's a faction that's talking about camaraderie under mind control, you know, they seem kind of good. In fact, it goes so far as actually a lot of humans jump ship sometimes to the Tau Empire because honestly, even though you are being a little bit controlled, it's a better deal. Your standard of living as a regular Joe is significantly higher in the Tau. But it was this greater good that honestly gives the Tau the communist tag. They're not fully communist, that's not them at all. Their government structure is not the same, but whatever. That's history nerd in me talking. But specifically, now the Tau were organized under this banner of the greater good. And they were put into a bunch of castes that differentiate what levels of work they can do. Largely, the main one that's talked about a lot is the Fire Warriors are from the Fire caste, and they are very militaristic and very powerful. But all those tribes that existed back on old Tau planet, they were all now put into castes based on the elements. You had the basic stuff, you know, it's water, earth, fire, air, the four elements that now lived in perfect harmony until the Imperium attacked, but, you know. This is what caused the Tau to shoot up in development from, like, basic tools to Gundams. Because now that every single part of their species was working together under a common goal, they got shit done. Because it turns out when you get rid of the whole, like, trying to kill each other thing, people just work well together and get things done. But it was here that the Tau decided to actually get things started and make new friends in the big wide galaxy. And hoo boy. Now, because the Tau are very new to everything in the universe, they don't understand how everything really worked. They're new players, so they approach things with this level of naivety that's been like actually been progressing to, you know, they're understanding the world a bit more. But there's some funny little stories, like the Tau killing a greater demon of Slaanesh, and they were like, yes, we killed Slaanesh, we did it, gang, one of the Chaos Gods is gone. Well, no, it's one part. Or the time they killed a chapter master of a Space Marine chapter, and we're like, we did it, boys, the Emperor's done. We did it. Or one of my favorite ones that I just recently learned of. So, the Imperium has these things, they're called Titans. Now, I talked about knights last week. Now picture a knight, but way bigger and a giant church on its back. It is a moving church with just gun platform mech. And the Tau thought it was propaganda because they were thinking, who in their right fucking mind would spend all of their resources building a giant mech with a church on top instead of, you know, funding a new army or building planetary infrastructure? The Imperium would, because they learned that wasn't true very quickly. But there are a lot of other examples, and a personal fun one is the time the Tau met the Drukhari. During massive engagement with the Tyranids, the Tau met up with, these strange new friends. They call themselves the Drukhari, and like, we're fighting together. Now specifically, the guy that was leading this band of Drukhari is a dude by the name of Urian Rakarth, who, if you understand like Dark Eldar, is a massive piece of shit. It's so bad he's notable for an entire group of people that are pieces of shit. They decided, hey, you know what'd be cool, Tau, new friends, if you gave us some of your planetary citizens as like a cultural exchange. That'd be super fun. And so obviously the Tau gave one good look at these people and were like, yeah, I will do that. And so they gave them a bunch of their people, to where later a bunch of these things came down as a big new military force was just made to go deal with the Nids. And they were like, hell yeah, we did it. Wait a second, that guy looks kind of blue. Why's he got like the Tau forehead marking? Oh no. And they realized that these monstrosities were the Tau they gave the Drukhari, to where they were like, hey, that's not cool, fuck you, why'd you do that? And like, it's funny. And so then they led an attack force. They called it in, of course, like, hey guys, we just encountered these dudes, Dark Eldar, don't trust them. I know they look really trustworthy, but please don't trust them. We're gonna go deal with them though. To where Urian Rakarth led them into a trap and then took all of them back to Kamarad to probably make more of these monstrosities. Because that's all Rakarth does. He just likes making little weird flesh craft because he's a sick little fuck. That's the one that gets like thrown around a lot, this story, but I think it encapsulates the whole thing of them being the most naive to the galaxy. And also, it's a fucking goofy story. Like, it's one of those fun stories of two 40k factions meeting for the first time. That's great. Seconded only to the time the Tyranids and the demons like first met and fought. Also a great time. But other than that, that's the general overview of who the Tau are. Now, there's a lot of other things to enjoy about the Tau if you do like it. One of the key parts I see brought up a lot is their style. Their style appeals to a lot of people, and to be fair, like, I can understand it. I have friends who really like the look of a bunch of the Tau models, because there are some really fun ones. A lot of their big mechs. I like the one with the Swarm Surge, I think it is, with all the missile pods, fun. The Manta is great, the one I mentioned earlier, because it's like 28 pounds of pure resin, and it's fucking massive. But, you know, if it's for you, good for you. It's not my vibe, as I mentioned, but like, I'm happy if you enjoy this. Tau lists are fun. There's a lot of really fun stuff in it. If you just like the idea of shooting your enemy off the board, you'll have a great time with Tau. You have, you know, your basic stuff, just really standard infantry like blasters, to a railgun that'll just kill your enemy in like their entire lineage in how big this fucking explosion is. So yeah, overwhelming firepower. If you like that whole vibe, you're gonna vibe with the Tau. But that's enough about them. We're gonna go right to the rules. So the Tau are in a really interesting place right now, as they've been recently hit with some nerfs, but like nothing major. I think they're still pretty well performing. However, as somebody who plays Custodes, an army that released alongside Tau, and both of them were similarly broken and then broken into the ground by nerfs, they're better now. They're playable and not as hair-wrenchingly annoying. Because the big thing with Tau, like I mentioned, is overwhelming firepower. Everything you have is going to be buffing your shooting and increasing how you shoot. All that stuff. Which, by the way, the first thing you get are war philosophies, which can encapsulate how you want to shoot. Now, you only get to pick one of these, and both of these are active in different phases of the game. Do you want to have just better movement and shooting in the beginning of the game, or do you want to have something at the end of the game that'll help you murder everything on the board? The only other big thing that you get just off the board, and you're going to have to really learn how to use properly, are marker lights. Now, marker lights are essentially, imagine putting a laser pointer on a person, but like permanently. As this will just give a unit you place it on, everyone shooting that unit for the first time they do will get a +1 to hit, which is just handy. Extra hits in general is just a good thing to have. So you're gonna have a lot of abilities that are compounding off of this rule, adding extra stuff to this rule, and comboing it so you can have as many out as possible and utilizing all of them as much. So really sit down with your codex if you want to play Tau and learn how marker lights work in every way you can maximize its effects. So then you have your basic pick, sub-factions. Now there are 2 sub-factions currently on fucking top. You have your Tau Seps and your Farside Enclaves, which I'm very happy Farsight is at least doing really well competitively, because dude's based. Basically, both of these are really similarly powerful. Tausept got a buff recently, but it's nothing that would make Farsight just worse. These ones are the two on top. Pick which one you like better. Now, Tausept gives you a lot of fun abilities, like a basic reroll that a lot of armies have, some really handy aura buffs, a +1 wound stratagem is really handy, just, you know, good stuff to have. Meanwhile, Farsight Enclaves has stuff of the distance you have means you have just a natural marker light, as well as an absolutely goofy rule that each one of your units can reroll one of their wound rolls, like per turn. That's stupidly powerful. You know, you miss your wound roll on your railgun, oh, let me just do it again. As well as a relic that is pretty nice, it gives you a Deny the Witch. You don't have any Psychers in your army. Tau don't got Psychers. So dealing with psychic stuff is just difficult. That's a handy relic to just give somebody. But other than for list building, honestly, there are some main keeps that you want to have. Your strike team, like Fire Warrior strike teams, you want your Hammerheads, your Riptides, your Crisis Suits. These three are very strong points of this. As well as, depending on who you want to go with, either Tausept or Farsight. Both of the character lists for Commander Shadowsun and Farsight are pretty fucking good. Not gonna lie, they're solid units, especially with that new spicy Farsight model that just dropped, which looks sick. But that's gonna be some of your determining factors. Other than that, go wild, have fun, get a town arm, go wild. Just find a big mech suit you think looks cool, the one that has the biggest guns or the biggest missile pods, and just go wild, have fun. But yeah, that's the Tau. So they're a really interesting faction, and meanwhile, I'm not a fan. I'm not going to pile on to the Tau hate because they get a lot. You know what? As funny as the Tau bad bottom text meme is, it's a little overplayed at this point. It's not funny anymore. But yeah, if you like this video, like, comment, subscribe, join my membership, do that stuff, and see ya.